And There Was a Great Calm by Thomas Hardy, 1840 to 1928. On the signing of the Armistice, 11 November 1918. There had been years of passion, scorching cold and much despair, and anger heaving high, care whitely watching, sorrows manifold, among the young, among the weak and old, and the pensive spirit of pity whispered, "Why?" Men had not paused to answer. Foes distraught pierced the thinned peoples in a brute-like blindness. Philosophies that sages long had taught and selflessness were an unknown thought, and hell and shell were yapped at Lovingkindness. The feeble folk at home had grown full used to dugouts, snipers, Huns, from the war-adept in the morning's herd, and at evetides perused. Today dreamt men in millions when they mused, to nightmare men in millions when they slept. Waking to wish existence timeless, null. Serious they watched above where armies fell. He seemed to check his flapping when, in the lull of a night, a boom came thence wise, like the dull plunge of a stone dropped into some deep well. So when old hopes that earth was bettering slowly were dead and damned, there sounded, "War is done," one morrow. Said the bereft and meek and lowly, "Will men some day be given to grace? Yea, wholly, and in good sooth, as our dreams used to run?" Breathless they paused. Out there men raised their glance to where had stood those poplars lank and lopped, as they had raised it through the 4 years' dance of death in the now familiar flats of France, and murmured, "Strange this, how? All firing stopped." Aye, all was hushed. The about to fire fired not. The aimed at moved away in trance-lipped song. One checkless regiment slung a clinching shot and turned. The spirit of irony smirked out, "What? Spoil peradventures woven of rage and wrong?" Thenceforth no flying fire inflamed the grey, no hurtling shook the dewdrop from the thorn, no moan perplexed the mute bird on the spray. Worn horses mused, "We are not whipped today." No weft-winged engines blurred the moon's thin horn. Calm fell. From heavens distilled a clemency. There was peace on earth and silence in the sky. Some could not, shake off misery. The sinister spirit sneered, "It had to be." And again the spirit of pity whispered, "Why?" Okay, this is a poem about the First World War. This is by Thomas Hardy, who would have been about 60. No, more than that. 78 when the First World War ended. Now let's see, Thomas Hardy was a writer and a poet. He came from Dorset. He's probably most famous for his Victorian realist novels like Jude the Obscure, The Mayor of Casterbridge. Let's see. His poetry is mostly romantic, and this poem is about the insanity of the First World War, about the horrors of war, and the great calm that came when the Armistice was signed. There had been years of passion, scorching cold, and much despair and anger heaving high. So there had been years of this war, of passion, scorching cold. I like this scorching cold. This cold is the idea of bad things happening, of winter, of death. And much despair and anger. So passions and despair and anger were high. Care whitely watching. So care is almost in the wings, watching. Sorrows manifold. There was sorrow everywhere. Among the young, among the weak and the old. So there was sorrow, sadness everywhere. Why? And the pensive spirit of pity whispered, why? And this is the question, why? Why all of this? Why have all of these people been killed? Why have all these lives been lost? What could have been done to stop this? Men had not paused to answer. So men hadn't stopped to answer this question, why? Foes distraught pierced the thin peoples in a brute-like blindness. So there were foes. There were foes everywhere, and this had reduced the number of people. This had killed huge numbers of people, and there was always an enemy to fight. And the people were thin. The people were reduced. The people became blind to anything good. Philosophies that sages long had taught and selflessness were an unknown thought. So these are philosophies that the wise men had taught, that selflessness, that giving yourself for others, all of these things had disappeared. There was no hope left. And hell and shell were what people were shouting all over Europe. And the words of love were common previously. Now hell and shell were the things that people talked about. That this war was hell, and there was shelling everywhere. The feeble folk at home had grown used to dugout snipers' Huns from the war-adept. So the people at home, they had got used to the jargon of war, the words that people use, dugouts and snipers and Huns. And these words came from the newspapers, from the media, from the people who were talking about the war. Every day, everything was dictated, was pushed by the war. And here at evetides perused, this is talking about perusing the newspaper and the speculation of what was happening. And these are the words, or these were the new words that were on everybody's lips. Today dreamt men in millions when they mused. So everybody is, when they're thinking, I think men are thinking that they wish they were somewhere else, that During the day, the men were daydreaming about being at home, about coming home, to nightmare men in millions when they slept. And then when these men slept, they dreamt of the millions of men who were dying, the millions of people who were dead. So they dreamt of being far away during the day, and at night they dreamt of the horror of war. Waking to wish existence timeless, null. So when they woke up finally, they wanted to life to be infinite, that an existence where they couldn't be killed. Or on the other hand, a null existence where everything just disappeared, that death would come to them immediately, and that would be the end of it. So some are desiring an eternal life where they're not going to be killed, and others that everything ends at that moment. Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. Sirius they watched above where armies fell. So they're watching the star at night. He seemed to check his flapping when in the lull of night a boom came thencewise. So the star, there was silence, and suddenly there's a boom in the night, and Sirius is watching silently, and then suddenly Sirius stops moving. It's like Sirius is moving across the sky, and Sirius suddenly stops, and there's an explosion in the distance, and this is like a stone that's falling down into a deep well, and down and down and down, and suddenly the stone hits the bottom, and that's the explosion. So we've got this idea of silence, and Sirius is watching, and then suddenly the stone hits the bottom. So when old hopes that earth was bettering slowly were dead and damned, there sounded, war is done one morrow. So when everybody was depressed by this, when there was no hope left, there was no hope, that none of the old hopes that things were getting better, that things were slowly improving, because during this war things have been getting worse and worse and worse, when all hopes that anything good could happen were dead and damned. War is over. There's like a trumpet saying, war is over. Said the bereft. So the bereft, the people who have lost their loved ones, and meek and lowly, the ordinary people. Will men someday be given to grace? So will men actually learn? Will men learn how not to do this? Yea, wholly and in good sooth, as our dreams used to run. Will we ever have dreams again like we used to before this war? Will we ever return to the dreams that we used to have, to the good, wholesome dreams that things were getting better? That will we ever get over the horror of this? Breathless they paused. So they're breathless. They can't believe it. Out there men raised their glance to where had stood those poplars, lank and lopped. So people actually started to look up, and they're looking up, and they look at the field that used to have tall poplar trees, lank, tall, and pruned poplar trees, but now all of the trees have gone. All of the trees have gone from the shelling, from the war. As they had raised it through the 4 years dance of death, in the now familiar flats of France. And they now looked at this place which used to have poplar trees, but now it's full of death, and it's quiet. And they murmured, "How strange is this? All firing stopped." And they looked at it and in disbelief. They said, "But the firing stopped. They just can't believe it." They have become used to war. They've become inured to the horror and the shelling and the death. All was hushed. Yes, everything was silent. The about to fire fired not. People who were going to fire didn't fire. The aimed at moved away in trance-lipped song. And people who were aimed at, people who were going to be fired at, they moved away from the battle. Yeah, and they're starting to sing. One checkless regiment slung a clinching shot and turned. Okay, this clinching shot, this is about the final shot of the First World War. There was an artillery piece called, and the name of the artillery piece was Calamity Jane, and they loaded it and they waited till exactly 11 o'clock on the 11th of November, and then they fired the last shot. The spirit of irony smirked out what? Spoil peradventures woven of rage and wrong. And then this is very ironic. This is very ironic that the end of this horrible war should be marked by another shot. Yeah, so there's one final shot which marks the end, and irony is smirking, is laughing at anybody who might speak against this, who might say this is the wrong thing to do. Thenceforth no flying fires inflamed the grey. So there will be no more fires in the grey days of battle. There will be no hurtlings shook the dewdrops from the thorn. So the hurtling, I think, is the hurtling of the shells coming down. And these are not going to shake the dew from the thorns. I think it's quite ironic that they're thorns. The only thing that is growing in the battlefield is thorns. So no fighting to shake the dew from the thorns. No moan perplex the mute bird on the spray. There'll be nobody moaning on the battlefield. Worn horses mused, "We are not whipped today." And the horses are saying, "But nobody's whipping us today. We're not going to have to work." No weft engines blurred the moon's thin horn. I think this is talking about aeroplanes. There are no aeroplanes that blurred the sky, and the problem seems to be over. Calm fell, so everything was calm. The falling calm from heaven distilled a clemency, so suddenly everybody was pardoned. Everybody that heaven made everybody clean. There was peace on earth and silence in the sky. So there was silence in the sky. But that didn't really mean the end of everything. Some could not shake off the misery. So some people could forget about the horrible things that had happened to them, both the soldiers and the people at home, but others couldn't, and there are many people who will be marked forever by this war. The sinister spirit, I love this sinister spirit. I think the sinister spirit is probably the devil, and the sinister spirit sneered. The sinister spirit sneered. It had to be. So the way things were going, it had to be like that. And again the spirit of pity whispered, why? Why did it have to be like that? Why did this happen? And there's no answer to this question. Why did this happen? And I think the whole poem is talking about wars. Wars start, and wars cause great suffering, and there's great suffering among many people. And the wars go on, and they go on for such a long time that nobody can even remember why they are fighting, why people are dying. And by the time the war ends, everybody is so scarred, so hurt, that nobody remembers why the war was fought in the first place. So it's a very sad, very down-looking poem about the horrors of war, or the horrors of the First World War. And there was a great calm by Thomas Hardy.